Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbiville. The path that Dick Deitrich took from Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania to the Brazos Valley included an 18-month hitch in the Army that started soon after Japan surrendered, but before President Truman officially declared the end of hostilities in December of 1946. So he served stateside, sent from base to base, and eventually to Fort Knox, Kentucky, to help forward mail to returning servicemen and those headed back overseas for post-war duty. His is one of those stories of service that he might not call remarkable, but we call essential, as was anyone who gave up the important time of their youth to serve their country. So please welcome Dick Deitrich to Veterans of the Valley. Dick, thank you for your service, first off, and thank you for being our guest. As we said, you were born in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. What part of the state is that in? That's on the river, right?
Well, it's on the Susquehanna River. It's about 75 miles up the river from the capital, Harrisburg.
Right. We talked a little bit about this. You were around 13 years old. You were a teenager, a young teenager during World War II. You turned 18 and actually signed up in the Air Force, or in the Army, in the Army on your 18th birthday. But talk about sort of what it was like when you were going to school and the war was going on, the war news was coming across, and were you taught about the war in classes in schools? Do you recall that?
I don't recall that. I remember seeing the news when we would go to the movies. The Path A News would tell about the war and how things were going. And,
right.
And I remember the rationing, the stamps, and you couldn't get shoes and sugar, and I wasn't a smoker, but you couldn't get cigarettes either. It was very difficult.
Right. And
they were selling war bonds, and you actually could buy stamps that you put in a book. And when you got $18.75 worth of stamps in the book, you could trade it in for, at that time they were called war bonds.
Uh-huh. Right. I guess you were around 13 years old, 13 or 14, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, and you said that you can recall that Sunday and what you were doing.
I remember that day very well. We were out in the street in front of the house throwing a football back and forth, and someone came out and said, it was on the radio, that Pearl Harbor had been attacked.
Right. 1946, it was after hostilities actually had ended. Japan had surrendered.
Yes, I graduated from high school in June of 45.
Right.
And I was 18 in January of 46.
January 3rd, you turned 18. Instead of being drafted, you went ahead and enlisted in the Army for a year and a half hitch. Talk about that.
Well, I really had always been interested in airplanes all my life.
Right.
But it was impossible at that time. They weren't looking for pilots or anybody else. And so the only other thing I had to do was join the Army. I knew if I was drafted, I might be put in the Navy, and I couldn't swim. So I decided, well, I better go ahead and try the Army for a year and a half.
Right. You went to Fort Meade, Maryland for your basic, and you took.
I was inducted at Fort Meade.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And we were given tests there, and I thought I'd go to the infantry since I didn't have any choice, but they sent me to the quartermaster in Camp Lee, Virginia, where I took my basic.
Right. You spent 8 weeks there, and you said that for a guy from Pennsylvania, you remember Virginia being pretty cold.
Yes, even though I was used to cold weather, I remember it was cold. I don't think we had all that much heat in the barracks.
Right. Because in Pennsylvania, you hadn't traveled much of anywhere. You were a long way from home, right?
Yeah, I really was. I'd been to New York State, and that's actually the only place out of the state of Pennsylvania I'd been until I joined the Army.
Right. You said that you remember in high school one sort of experience with the war is that you had seen some German POWs at a camp in Pennsylvania. Right?
Well, I belonged to the Civilian Air Patrol Cadets, mm-hmm. and once a year we would get to go to an Air Force base. And the first time we went to Rome Air Force Base in New York. That was the time I was in New York State. And then the other time we went to Reading Air Force Base in Pennsylvania, and there were German POWs there at the time.
Right.
And my wife related to me later that her father was in Tennessee, and they were having a logging company that did logging, and they had German prisoners. And my stepson was just a baby, and my father-in-law took him on the job, and one of these German prisoners asked him, said, could he hold the baby? And And he said, well, why? He said, well, I have a son about that same age at home. And so he let him hold the baby.
Wow. That must have been a very moving moment, I'm sure.
sure it was
Obviously
for
for the
them.
German soldier.
Yeah, oh, yes.
Yeah, and for your young stepson at the time.
Right.
At the time, sure. You then you went a long way from home. You went all the way to Georgia, to Oglethorpe in Georgia. Talk about what your duty was there.
Well, after basic training, I was sent to Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia for the postal class, studied to be a postal clerk. It's called the Adjutant General School. And after that schooling was over, I was sent back to Camp Lee. And they really didn't have a lot for us to do there. I think we went into town and picked up mail, but it really wasn't much of a job. And next thing I knew, I was sent back to Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia. And they had us loading these boxcars with all this equipment, and we didn't know exactly what it was. And then I got transferred to Carlisle Barracks. And when I got to Carlisle Barracks...
And that's back in Pennsylvania, close to your home,
yes, this
right?
is only about less than 100 miles from my home, which made me happy because I could go home every weekend.
Right.
But when I got up there, here the train was that we loaded was there. And so we unloaded the school, and what they were doing, they were relocating the school from Fort Oglethorpe to Carlisle Barracks. I was only there about a month when I guess this is what we were officially became the 117th Army Postal Unit, and I was sent to Fort Knox, Kentucky, assigned to the 7th Army, the Armored Division.
Talk about your duty there, because that's where you sort of continued as far as postal service. And,
Yes.
And talk a little bit about what you did there and how you went about doing it.
My job there was that any mail that came in for servicemen that had left the post would come to us, and we had these boxes with their newest address on there, and we would look them up and forward the mail to where they had been assigned, or if they were going overseas, or wherever they were, their latest address we put on there and forwarded that mail on.
Right. So these were soldiers that had been overseas, that were coming home and being assigned, either staying in or signed or going home or wherever. It was your job to sort of research and look and find out where they are so that they'd get their mail.
Yeah, actually, most of them were actually going over or being assigned overseas.
Back overseas.
Yes.
Right. And so it was your job to find out where they were assigned and to get their mail to
Get the
them.
mail to them. It was like mail coming from home.
Right. So you were pretty much their hero, right? 'Cause
I don't know about that.
They didn't know that you were their hero, but you were the guy that was getting their mail to them. So
Right.
that obviously meant a lot to them. How long were you at Fort Knox?
6 months.
You were there for 6 months.
Yeah, I got discharged from Fort Knox.
From Fort Knox, yeah. We got a picture coming up a little bit later of you performing that duty at Fort Knox. So, so you were discharged. You got out in June of 1947 and had a tough time getting home. You had to thumb it, right?
Well, money's always tight. It was always tight when I was young, and so we did hitchhike home. That was quite an adventure. I know one time we got picked up. There were several of us, and
Right.
we were picked up by some guys in a pickup truck, and we were in the back of the truck, and we really didn't know they'd been drinking a little bit, so we even went off the road one time. So we were glad we got off of that ride. But I eventually got home safely.
And they say that you didn't have combat duty. If anything, it was just getting out of that truck, right? Right. I met you just a few weeks ago as part of the American Legion, but your history with the American Legion goes back to even when you were discharged from the Army. Talk about that.
As soon as I got out of the Army, I came back to Bloomsburg, and I joined the American Legion post there. And they had a drum and bugle corps, and I got into that. I wasn't a musician, and it's kind of strange in a way. We only had one guy in there that could read music, but he would play what we were going to play, and then everybody would listen, and the rest of us would play it by ear. But we participated in parades, and at one time we had a competition in Philadelphia, and we paraded in Philadelphia too. And then besides that, when we had military funerals, I would be off to the side, and I would play taps after at the service.
Right. Had you played the bugle before you
No.
did that? You just sort of learned it by ear?
Learned it by ear.
I know the American Legion, the Earl Graham post here is very, very much involved in the there's a funeral corps, there's funeral activity. Do you involve yourself in
No,
that?
I'm not a member of the honor guard.
The honor guard, right?
Yeah, they do quite a few of them.
Yeah, yeah. I want to talk about the local American Legion and the involvement in that, because they do such a great job there. You talked about the story about how your father-in-law lived in Tennessee and your stepson being held by the German soldier. You got out, work was hard to come by, and we've heard a lot about the 5220 Club. Tell people what that is and how you got involved in it.
The 5220 Club was where veterans could get $20 a week for 52 weeks, and so we called it the 5220 Club. And you had to go down each week to get your money, and if they had a job for you, I mean, you went and worked instead of getting the $20. Well, they had a job for me, and it was at a farm, at an orchard, and I was picking peaches, and it lasted 5 days, and I worked 8 hours a day for 5 days, and I made 50 cents an hour, and that was the same $20 that I would have got free.
But you got the $20 each week for 52 weeks, whether you worked or not.
Right.
How often were you? So you had to go to get your $20 and find out then whether or not they had a job for you.
Correct.
So sometimes you didn't work and you got your $20.
Most of the time we didn't.
Most of the time you didn't. So but $20 a week, even back then.
That was a lot of money.
That was a lot of money. Were you able to stretch it pretty far?
Well, I didn't. Yes, it was the only money I would have. Well, I got a little money when I got discharged, but it wasn't a lot either. A couple $100. Right.
How a lot of people that had been veterans were in this 5220 program.
Oh yes.
Yeah, that's just how it worked. So that's how the taxpayer dollar helped at the time, and you appreciate it, right? Right. You were out of the Army just over a year, and that's when the state of Texas came into your plans. You were in Pennsylvania, I guess. So what led you to Texas?
Well, the only jobs really that were open there, and I had worked in a grocery store there too, but the only jobs were in the stores, or that we had canning factories, and we also had mills, silk mills and woolen mills, and the big carpet mill was there too. And that was really the only jobs that you had, and that really didn't interest me. I really wanted to go to college when I came back out, but it just wasn't financially able. I thought I might be able to go to the college there in Bloomsburg, but I was going to have to go out near Pittsburgh, and I had no money, and the parents, they didn't have any money to support me on that. So I found out that there was some fellows that been down to Houston and worked for oil companies, and some of them had come back, and we heard that was a pretty good place to try to find a job. So there were three of us who decided we would go to Houston, but one of them backed out, and we went to the hotel where they sold the bus tickets, and we bought a one-way ticket, and they were about that long, all the different stops and all, to Houston. And when we got to Houston, my buddy, who was 21, he got a job with Shell Oil Company. He stayed there till he retired, but I was only 20.
So they wouldn't give you a
job.
They
wouldn't hire me. And we were rooming and boarding with a lady knew a man at the First National Bank.
Right.
And she got me a job there at the bank, and I was making $125 a month plus 10% cost of living bonus, which turned it out to be $137.50 a month.
Right. Well, you went from $80 a month in the 5220 Club to $137 a month,
Right.
So that was quite a raise.
Right. Well, I managed to make it work.
But you were paying $15 a week for room and board, right? So,
Right.
that was $60 of it was.
Almost
half of it was
yeah.
going for your room and board.
Right.
And you stayed there for 4 years.
For 4 years
at the First National Bank.
First National Bank, and then I got a position with Houston Sash and Door Company as an assistant bookkeeper.
Right. Now you'd gone to the University of Houston and studied
I was
accounting
studying.
on the GI Bill.
Yeah,
right?
I used the GI Bill, which was one of the wonderful benefits of being in the Army, and all of my schooling was night school. I went to University of Houston night school for about 5 years, but it wasn't enough time to get a degree. But I did get a lot of accounting experience.
Right.
And eventually, the man that was the head bookkeeper, he passed away, and I fell into the job. And
Houston Door and Sash, and you were there for 22 years.
Yes.
A lot of memories there. I think you said soon after you left, they went bankrupt. So.
Yes. They did.
So they lost their accountant and they went bankrupt. What does that say? It must say you were a pretty good accountant.
Well, I don't.
They shouldn't have lost you.
I don't know. I got behind a little bit. I think maybe that's the reason I wasn't there. But they hired 2 people to take my place, but they still didn't make it much longer after I was there.
It took 2 people to take your place. Let's take a look at some pictures. We've got 3 or 4 photographs that you've supplied us of you in your youth, and one of them is going to be the first one we're going to see is of unit. Talk about where this was taken. And I think
This was taken at Fort Knox, and I think we were getting ready for a parade.
You're on the bottom right.
And I'm on the bottom right. Why I don't have my rifle or carbine, I don't know, but it doesn't look like it's in the picture. But that's what that picture was.
Getting ready for a parade.
And that's me on the right. I'm the shortest one, and I weighed soaking wet about 120 pounds at the time I went in the service.
Now you're on the right, and I got to tell the story. Your wife Wanda says that that you look a little like Barney Fife in that picture, and I've got to agree with her. I think I can see that guy talking to Andy right there. This was where was this one taken?
Okay, this one was taken right outside the post locator where we worked. That was a building in the background there. I'm the one in the middle with the jacket and the cap on.
Right, second from the right.
Yes. And this is me at work, going through the cards looking for, as you can, well, I see there's the envelope, and I'm looking for his name and new address so that I can redirect that piece of mail.
I see. So this is what you did. This was
Yes.
your job, and that's the place that you did it there at Fort Knox.
Yes.
Looks like that might have gotten to be a lonely place every once in a while. But how many people were doing the same job that you were doing?
Probably about 3 or 4
Yeah.
or more. I think we had about 12 or 15 in our group in the postal unit.
Right. You worked every day, or did you get a day off, or
We worked every day.
just worked every day?
Yeah, I don't know. We probably got the weekends off.
Yeah. Right. What'd you do for recreation? What'd you remember? Did you go into town, go to movies, and?
Well, I remember they had the Kentucky Derby there, but I wasn't interested in horse racing at the time, and so I missed a big event.
Yeah.
Some of the other guys went, and they had the Indianapolis 500
Right.
at that time too, which was an interest of mine, but I didn't get to go to that either. But we would go to town and, just go to the parks mostly.
Right. Right. You left Houston Session Door in 1975, and you worked for some other building material places. Last job was a controller at Western Lakes Country Club. Is that right?
Correct.
In West Houston. Talk about what brought you to the Brazos Valley. You and your late wife Mayful had moved to Grimes County, right, and built a house.
Yes. Well, after I'd rose up in the country at Houston Session Door, I was the vice president and assistant secretary. I was making pretty good money, and some of us decided we ought to buy some land. So I need to thank my wife for this, because she went up and found this land, and we bought 45 acres at Singleton, Texas, which is State Highway 90 actually ran through the property. We had 40 acres on one side and 5 on the other. And that was in 1970 I bought that property. And in about 81 we built a house up there, and we had a trailer up there at first, and we would go up and spend time on that trailer. But then we finally built a house, and we would go up there and spend time on the weekends. And when we retired in April of 1990, we moved up there.
And you did retire in 1990. Now you lost your wife, your first wife Mayful, in 1997, and you visited with me earlier about the effect that had on you and the depression, because you knew that she was sick before she passed away. Talk as much as you want to about that, but what it leads into is just sort of your interest in aviation that had gone back to when you were a youth, how that was able to fulfill itself and help you get out of the depression. Talk about that.
Well, I went into severe depression. She was in St. Joe's, and they put me in St. Joe's at the same time. And my depression was so bad that they didn't have the facilities to treat me there, so I was transferred to UTMB in Galveston, which was close to where my daughter lived, so that she could kind of look after me. So I was put in the psychiatric ward down there, and it was tough, because you were actually locked up, really.
Right.
And they tried all kinds of medications. I was in and out of the hospital, and they tried all different kinds of medications, and they didn't seem to work. And finally, she had to go to court to allow them to use the ECTs, which is electric shock treatments. And I had 6 of those, and I got discharged from the hospital, and I was doing really well. And so I came back to Grimes County, and I was okay, but I stayed there too long by myself, and I relapsed and went back down to UTMB, and I had 6 more treatments. And at the end of those, the doctor said, Dick, we can do one of 3 things for you. We can give you some medication like Prozac or Zoloft or Paxil. I already had all of those things. Right. They didn't help. Or you can come down here one of these once a month and have one of these other treatments, or we can do nothing. I said, well, I really don't want to do anything. So I was staying with my daughter at the time, and the Flight Museum was having an open house at Lone Star Flight Museum in Galveston. So I went over and I joined. Well, I was always interested in aviation. Here's all these World War II airplanes, and it was wonderful for me.
Right.
And so while I was staying with her, I would go over there to the museum and work all day long with the curators and made a lot of good friends there. And I stayed there until I joined about January of '98, and it wasn't too long after that I was able to come home, and I was okay. But I would go down there and stay with her and go to the museum. And I would work air shows, and finally they asked me after I'd had so many hours, would I like to go to an air show? Well, you bet. So I remember this very well. My first air show was at Burnett, Texas, and my brother lived out there. And I called him on the phone, and I said, Chuck, I am going to come over there for Easter. Oh, well, that's good. Yeah, but I'm coming into B-17. And so we flew over to Burnett in the B-17. And I had made some other, one of the air shows we went to, I think it was San Marcos. I flew over in the B-17 and flew back in the B-25. But my biggest memory was we were going to an air show in Pope Air Force Base in North Carolina. And we about halfway over there, and I'd been all over the airplane, sitting in the bombardier seat, and the gunners and the navigators and all those seats. But I'd never sat in the left seat. And then one of the guys said, have you ever sat in the left seat? No. Well, get up here. So for about 30 minutes, they let me keep that B-17 on course and level. And that's probably the highlight of my life.
You did get to be a pilot. You did get to be a pilot. You mentioned your brother Chuck. You said he's my famous brother. Talk about Chuck and the very important job he had in a very important part of our history.
My brother Chuck worked for NASA. He's 10 years younger than I am. And he was the retrofire officer on Apollo 13. He was on Gene Kranz's team. And his main job was to see that those guys came back. And of course, everybody's seen the movie was pretty accurate.
Yes, sir.
And he consulted with them when they made the movie, as a matter of
but with Ron Howard, the director.
Ron Howard, the director, and Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
So, and he knows, he's spoken a lot. He knows all those astronauts. And so it was his job to figure out where they needed to land in the Pacific. And some of them wanted to change where they wanted to land, but he was pretty insistent that they stay where they did. As it turned out, that was fine. The landing was, everybody knows now that they got them back home and everything. But the alternate landing site, there actually was a typhoon where they wanted to change it to. So his insistence that they don't change their plans really worked out well.
Indeed. I think you said later there was a TV movie called Houston, We Have a Problem.
Yeah, there was a TV movie called Houston, We Have a Problem. It was about Apollo 13. And in that movie, Robert Culp played my brother.
I see. You got to be very proud of him.
Yes, I am. He's quite a guy.
Yeah, and he works for Blue Origin.
Now he works for Jeff Bezos, who has this project called Blue Origin, and that's a civilian rocket program to take people into space. They have a launching place out in West Texas. I don't know, thousands of acres. I think that they've got it. He has out there.
Right. As wonderful as the Flight Museum did for you and did for your life and turned it around and everything like that, in 2003, you met a lady who obviously has really changed your life. Talk about Wanda.
Well, I was pretty active with the Republican in Grimes County. I was precinct chair, and they had a meeting in Bryan, Senate District 5 meeting, and the Brazos Valley Christian Singles they were having a bunco party at Otto's Bakery, and so we would have a meal there and then play bunco. And after the meeting, there was still time. I went to the movies, and then I went over to Otto's Bakery. Well, when we were playing bunco, I threw a bunco, and Wanda's hand got on it first, and I put my hand on top of hers, and she kind of looked at me and.
And it was love.
Well, she gave me her email, and we emailed back and forth for quite a while, and then she finally she decided, well, we had a lot in common, so she invited me over for roast beef and pot roast and to watch professional football. And we married then in June of '04.
At Disney World.
At Disney World.
At Disney World with Mickey Mouse ears.
Yeah. A funny part about that is I'm standing out of a restroom, outside a restroom. I got this hat on with the ears, and I'm holding the bouquet.
I bet that makes for, you didn't give us that picture.
There wasn't a picture, I don't think.
We're out of time, but thank you very much for your service and a great story, and thank you for the help that you've given people through your own battles. I appreciate it.
I hope it helps somebody.
Indeed. Thank you for your service. Dick Deitrich's service never took him so far from home as even west of the Mississippi, but it was time proudly served and essential to our cause of freedom. He speaks freely of his personal battles and how it was volunteerism that helped him win those battles, so we salute Dick Deitrich for his service to the U.S. Army and wish him and Wanda years of deserved happiness to come. I'm Tom Turbiville. Join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.